This is about the time when I used to work as a stripper in one of the strip clubs in Las Vegas, and it had only been a month since I started. Whenever I share my stripper stories with people, the most common question I get is, there are many jobs that you can do to earn money, so why are you stripping? Honestly, being a runaway from an orphanage and struggling to survive till you get 20 years old, you get a few ideas on where you could get good money. And for me, stripping seemed far better than stealing from people. Anyway, so I was pretty new to this stripper thing, and trust me, I saw a competition between those women who were working there. So they were no help at all, except for one girl, Kara. She seemed shy for a stripper, and after talking to her a few times, I found out it could be months for her since she started working there. The other girls were like hawks. They could tell by looking at a man how much money he'd be willing to throw on them, and what moves were best to get them to pull out their money. Since I had always been the kind of girl who learned by watching others, it wasn't hard for me to pick up on those moves myself. People coming here were all looking for fun and stuff, so it wasn't that big of a deal to wrap them around your fingers after showing some unique combination of moves. So slowly, I started to beat those girls and getting the most tips around the club. I often sneaked a few dollars and shared them with Kara later. The work in the club was strictly business, so outside that place, I was an entirely different person with dignity and all. I stopped telling people what I do for a living after giving a few negative responses, and even though stripping is still so common in Las Vegas, people's opinions of someone like me weren't pleasant ones. It sometimes stung when I saw the hungry look in those men's eyes in the club, who saw us as nothing more than prostitutes. But I tried to ignore it as much as I could. I remember the last time when I revealed my profession to someone. It was the guy that I had recently started dating, and he ended things with me the same moment by saying, "I don't think any man in their right mind would want to have a serious committed relationship with a girl like you." I'll admit, it hurt as hell, but I got over it pretty soon and decided I would never date. It was not for me whatsoever. I'm grateful for earlier. I turned as Kara's timid voice fell on my ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." I tried not to look in her eyes. "I know you took the blame in front of the managers, knowing it was me who stole the money," she said softly while looking down. "I didn't. But now that you mention it, let me suggest that keep it to yourself." I walked away after saying that, but I could feel her gaze on my back the entire time. It was earlier that night when we were performing on stage. I went to the restroom, and when I was coming back, I saw Kara sliding dollar bills inside her bra, which were more than what she usually stole. After that, she went to the restroom, and I knew where she was going to hide the money. I knew she was having some problem at home because her brother was in a coma and all, so I acted as if I didn't see anything. But what I didn't know was that the money she stole had already been counted by the manager, and when he started asking questions, one of the older bitches ratted the two of us out, saying she'd been sliding money before. I took it. As I saw him leaning on Kara, whose face was getting paler by the minute, I shouted. He jolted his head back to me and walked over. "Where is it?" he asked in a loud, angry voice. But instead of replying, I stayed silent. Smack! A sharp slap came across my face, causing my jaws a stinging pain. "I'm asking where you put the money, bitch." He then grabbed my hair, pulled it back, and screamed in my face. I stayed silent, because I couldn't tell what I didn't have. But then another slap came right on the other cheek of my face, leaving the mark of his fingers on it. "Julie, strip this bitch, every single cloth, and check if she's hiding it in there somewhere." As he said that, she came forward with an evil smirk on her face, and even though she knew I never stripped naked even while performing, she did just that. A single tear of humiliation fell from my left eye as she searched my body, with every eye on the room on me. As I mentioned before, whatever I did here was strictly professional, and I never did such a thing when not working. So the rage I felt at that moment was beyond what one could imagine. He threatened me a few more times, but when I still didn't open my mouth after going through such humiliation, he let me go, while saying he was going to deduct the money from my pay. After Kara apologized to me, I went straight to my apartment. but I couldn't sleep thinking of whatever I just went through. It was when I came across an article that more than 200 people vanish each month in Las Vegas without a trace or possibility of coming back. I got an idea of what to do. The girl who ratted me out was Julie, and looking at how much she was enjoying ripping my clothes off my body, I had to teach her a lesson. Luckily for me, I knew where she lived. Not so much for her though. Her apartment was within 10 minutes of walking distance from the club, so I went straight to her place. By living on the streets and breaking into people's houses to steal, I had learned a thing or two, so unlocking her door and walking in there was a piece of cake. I was startled by a few muffling sounds, so I tried to listen closely, only to realize it was moaning and panting sounds coming out of her bedroom. I went ahead to watch the show. When I saw the manager on top of Julie, my blood started to boil. So these two were having an affair all this time. That was why she was so smug about ruining our lives. I grabbed the half-filled wine bottle that was on the kitchen top from the base in my other hand. I sneaked in there when they didn't notice, and by the time they could realize, I broke the wine bottle on the manager's head. Just before Julie could scream, I hit her with the vase. The two of them passed out that instant. I knew very well that they were just unconscious and not dead, but I wasn't going to let this chance go. I grabbed all the alcohol bottles from the kitchen and emptied its contents throughout the room. After starting a fire, I locked the bedroom from the outside and leaked the gas pipes in the kitchen before exiting her apartment. I was thinking of only scaring Julie by making her think that she was kidnapped, but the rage I felt after watching the two of them together brought back all the memories of their slaps and humiliation, and that turned me into an arsonist. Hey Kara, listen, do you want to move to New York with me? I think your brother could get better treatment there, and we could find a better strip club than this one too. What do you say? I called Kara as I was walking back to my apartment. Well, she didn't agree after all and said she would continue to work in Las Vegas, but would try to look for a better job than stripping. And I moved to New York the very next day since I didn't want to get caught after killing two people who bullied me. I still wonder how come police didn't find me. I know what I would have been seen as the prime suspect if a proper investigation was to be held. Maybe the owner of the club had something to do with it. Who knows? But whatever, it's in my favor. So who cares? Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. People in Las Vegas are crazy. Now, by crazy, I don't mean mental illness crazy. They're the kind of crazy who don't make sense. Well, for a girl who has spent most of her life stuck in the suburbs being homeschooled, nothing makes sense about this city. The only thing I was allowed to do in the name of socializing back then was attend the public library, where I made a few friends. I'm thinking this must be because I'm their foster child. In my opinion, this is the only argument that made sense for such a strict treatment. There is one more thing that I remember, which was back in elementary school when I was brutally beaten up by a guy for being weird. Doesn't matter what the reason was, but cutting me off from society was too harsh, even if it was for my safety. Thankfully, they started to let me be a little more outgoing after my 18th birthday, and that's what led me to come here to Vegas for a 5-day trip. About Las Vegas being crazy, trust me, I'm not exaggerating the crazy part. I hadn't eaten the entire day when I first got there. I was with 6 people, as there were too many of them. I'll name them as the story progresses. Anyway, 5 of them went to the hotel to check in and put our luggage in the room, while Kyla stayed with me at what seemed like a local restaurant with not many people, despite Vegas being crowded most of the time, especially at night. She hadn't eaten the entire day for the same reason as me. Since the two of us had gastric problems, we don't like to eat when we travel. I couldn't understand what the restaurant's theme was by looking at it, but it was an open restaurant with chairs and tables sitting outside. The midnight blue covers on them were giving off a unique look to it. I turned to Kyla, being unaffected by all this, unlike me, since she had already taken a seat and was going through the menu. I guess it must just be me, since I wasn't used to seeing new things yet, so I quietly took the seat next to her and patiently waited for her to order. After giving the order of 2 mussels along with 1 side of chips and salsa, she handed me the menu, saying I could order anything else if I wanted. I shook my head no and continued sitting there while looking around at the not-so-busy street. Since I was expecting the kind of crowd who would be rushing toward each other, this seemed a bit disappointing. I know what you're thinking. It's because we found the hotel far away from Las Vegas that people talked about. This place is much cheaper since not many people know about it. We'll be heading to the main street tomorrow morning after some rest. Don't look too disappointed, Kyla said, sensing my expression. Guess I was being obvious. By the way, I need to go to the restroom. I'll be back. She got up and asked for the direction from one of the employees and then headed there. It had been about 10 minutes since she had left. The boy on the counter signaled for me to pick up the order, so I headed there, and as I got back to the table, I noticed the rustling sound under the table. The table covers also looked as if they were moving a bit. I didn't pay much attention to it, but when the faint weird noises didn't stop, I crouched down to see what was going on. I peeked under the covered tables, only to find a grown-ass man, probably in his late 30s, lying on his stomach with his head up, giving the creepiest smile. It spooked me for a second, but then I regained my composure and asked, sir, what are you doing under there? He didn't say a word. Instead, he brought his index finger to his lips, making a shush sign. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? I heard Kyla's voice, so I immediately got up and backed away from our table. Let's sit over there. I grabbed our food and walked to the other empty table. Why? What's the issue with that one? She said annoyingly as I checked the table for any other possible men hiding, but luckily there wasn't. There's someone under there, I said in a low whispering sound while cupping my palms and placing them on each side of my mouth. But her expression told me that she wasn't able to listen to me, and as I was about to repeat what I had heard, a commotion behind me, I turned around to see a bald guy with a scorpion tattoo on the back of his neck, which went all the way back to the lower part of his head, standing at the counter pointing a gun at the employee. That was when the guy who was hiding under the table rushed out as well, taking out a gun and pointing to another employee, still showing his teeth, making that same creepy smile on his face. This looked like the case of armed robbery, but the expression on the table guy screamed insane from every angle. I didn't know if this was a normal thing in Vegas or not, since I had heard many stories from my friends about the place, so I looked toward the girl sitting with me, only to find her face going pale by the minute. The guy who I saw under the table took notice of me sitting at 2 tables distance from him, and with maintaining his disturbing smile, he gave me a wink, which made my blood curdle. The other guy forced the counter boy out and said something in a different language, which sounded like cuss words, before punching him in the gut. The next thing I saw was the most legitimately horrifying scene I had ever witnessed in my entire lifetime. As the boy curled up with unbearable pain, the table guy shot him in the chest, followed by another shot by the other guy in the head, which finished him off on the spot. Screams erupted through every direction, including my throat, and people started rushing out. The weird thing was that those guys didn't run off after publicly committing a murder and just sat down staring at the lifeless body of the boy, the creepy smile never leaving the table guy's lips as the police arrived on the scene. I had frozen still on the table. I was too petrified from all that to move. But as the police were taking those 2 guys, one of them gave me a brief wave that only I took notice of. An eldritch feeling took over my body, and a few unwanted drops of tears started to fall from my eyes. I was so abstracted by whatever just transpired to notice 2 pairs of hands gripping my shoulders and taking me away from the crime scene. Sarah, are you okay? I gave a nonplussed look to Eric and Luca, who seemed to have gotten here after hearing the news from Kyla. As I was coming back to my senses, I saw Kevin and Bailey by her side trying to console her. Bailey and Luca took us to the hotel room, while Kevin and Eric disappeared somewhere, only to be back with takeout in their hands. My appetite had died down after witnessing what I just had. By the looks of it, my fellow witness friends were feeling the same. The rest of the days of our trip went normal, and despite the sudden petrifying turn of events on the first day, I didn't find any more men hiding under the table or giving me creepy winks, except for the boys who were trying to make a pass on me in the club. Other crazy things that I found were half-naked street performers, some with unique makeup on their faces. I know it might sound weird coming from me after witnessing something so terrible which should have ruined the fun, but I kinda enjoyed the trip other than being jumpy every time I looked at a bald man with a tattoo. And I know for a fact that I'm going to remember this one trip for the rest of my life.
My mom is really good friends with one of the wealthiest people in our town. They have a daughter, my age. I don't have a crush on her or anything, but my mom has pushed me to ask her out before. Never did. Here's the weird thing about the situation, though. My mom and this friend, along with their daughter, all kind of act like their friend. Like a bunch of high school girls getting together to gossip. My mom works in a beauty salon, so I guess I understand why she likes to act that way, but it's still pretty weird nonetheless. There was one specific occasion when this woman and her daughter were going to visit New York City. They decided to invite my mom for some reason. I don't understand why. I guess they really were better friends than I had previously believed. But my mom decided to say yes. So it was just me and my dad at the house, but here was the thing. They didn't have a dad at home. Their house was going to be completely unsupervised for the entire weekend. I was in my early 20s at the time, so I guess they thought it would be a good idea to ask if I would watch the house for them, which I agreed to do. I didn't get paid or anything, but they said I was allowed to eat as much food as I wanted, and considering that they were rich, I thought, why not? This also gave me an opportunity to write some short stories. I always loved writing, and I published some of my stuff online sometimes. I think it was that Friday night when I was watching their house. They told me that they had 2 cats, but they were really scared of strangers, and I was probably not going to see either one of them the entire night. Didn't bother me. I just had to make sure that they had food and water, which they did. I was chilling at the kitchen table, pounding the keys on my laptop on my latest story when, all of a sudden, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up from my computer to notice the ugliest cat I've ever seen in my life. Just imagine a hairless cat, but also morbidly obese and cross-eyed. It was honestly the strangest thing I've ever seen. Any one of those traits individually would have made a cat kind of cute, but seeing all of them thrown together in one pitiful excuse for a pet almost made me want to bust a gut laughing. I felt kind of bad for laughing so hard at this girl's cat, but it's not like I hurt it or anything. That had been a good break from writing, but then I got back into it. I remember being in the middle of writing a really interesting scene. This ghost was abducting the protagonist of the story. It's kind of a psychological thriller with a little bit of paranormal thrown in there. It's very spiritual and weird. I'm kind of a weird person. But that scene still sticks with me because as I'm writing it, I noticed something outside. There was a man in a hooded sweatshirt walking around. I sat at the kitchen table, stunned. I didn't know what to do. I felt the adrenaline burst through my veins. Fight or flight. Well, I figured that my car was outside, so running wasn't going to do me much good. And after a minute of rationalizing the situation, I had no proof that this person was out to do anything bad. For all I knew, this could have been a jogger. I got up close to one of the windows to watch this man. He seemed to be sneaking around. He wasn't coming toward the house I was in, so I figured that I was at least safe for the moment. But then I noticed him looking into the window of the house across the street. I can only assume that he was checking houses to see if people were home or not. Must have been an actual burglar. Just show up in the wealthy neighborhood and see who wasn't home. I don't know why he would do it at night though. Looks as suspicious as he did. We live in a gun state after all. And after a few minutes went by and I could tell that there were people at home at the house he was checking out. By the time he realized, I noticed him do a 180. He was walking in my direction now. I was about to be face to face with this man. I saw him walking across the street and I immediately started to panic. I called the police as fast as I could and told them the situation, but they said it would be about 20 minutes before anyone could be here. I ran up to the attic to hide. I locked the door behind me. In retrospect, this was my biggest mistake. I should have turned on a bunch of lights and made it obvious that someone was here. I'm good at thinking, just not in the moment. The house must have looked uninhabited by the time I had gotten up to the attic. This made the house the perfect place to burglarize and steal everything. I was in the attic for about 10 minutes when I heard a window breaking downstairs. He was in the house. My heartbeat was inside of my forehead. He walked around the house for a few minutes. Thud. Thud. I heard the humongous boots marching across the wooden floors. He explored the house for a good while. I was really beginning to wonder where the police were. Typical. I heard him get close to the attic entrance, and that was the moment that pushed me over the edge. I started screaming at the top of my lungs that I had a gun. I told him that I was going to shoot his head off if he didn't leave the house immediately. And to my absolute shock, he ran away. I watched him run down the street as I looked on through the window. It appeared that this guy was even more scared for his life than I was. The police eventually got there, and I told them the entire story from beginning to end. They said that a couple of people had been reporting this guy in nearby neighborhoods, so this wasn't the first night he's been out doing this. The police explained that this guy hadn't been violent on any of the occasions they'd been called. They said it was about the 7th time this month that they have responded to a similar incident in a wealthy neighborhood. I guess he's going around looking for an easy way to make money. He hasn't been face to face with any of the homeowners yet, so maybe he isn't a violent criminal, just a criminal in general. I found the entire experience really interesting yet mortifying. Living through it was probably the most scared I've ever been. My mom, her friend, and their daughter didn't even come back early from their trip after it happened. I thought that was a lame move, but what do I know? For revenge, I ate every single pizza roll they had in the freezer, and if you're wondering, there were 3 bags of 90 pizza rolls. I ate over 270 pizza rolls that weekend, and I have no regrets. I sorely needed them after that borderline traumatic experience with the burglar.
So for the longest time in my teenage years, I earned a few bucks a week by doing babysitting work. It always made me giggle at how there are so many urban legends based around babysitting. The serial killer that stalks the unwitting teen, the call coming from inside the house. Pretty much every Halloween movie in some manner that seems to present babysitting as the vocation of those with a death wish, when in reality, the only thing likely to kill you is the boredom. Sure, you get a bratty kid and makes an evening a little more challenging, but you get a good one. And you're basically sat on the couch for hours on end watching tedious cable TV shows and counting the minutes until the parents get home. Saying that I did babysitting for one family that ended in a frankly terrifying experience that ended up in me never, ever sitting for them ever again. It only happened once, but sometimes once is enough. So I arrived at this big old house a few blocks away from my parents' house at around 6:31 Friday evening. The parents of the kid seemed incredibly charming, and the kid is one of the more adorable little tykes that I've had the good fortune of minding. We go over a brief list of rules, what the kid is and isn't allowed to eat, how much I'll be paid, and how long I'll be sitting for, and that sort of thing. Then the parents head out to whatever fancy party that they had been planning on attending. All goes well for a little while. The kid wouldn't eat their carrots, but when I pretended that they were delicious by taking little bites myself, they soon broke into a smile and pretty much demolished the little bowl of hummus that we were sharing. With a kid fed, I gave her a bath, tucked her in the bed, and that's that. It was honestly one of the easiest jobs I'd had, right up until the sun started to go down. So once the kid's asleep, I head downstairs to order a pizza on the parents' dollar. Like I said, they were perfectly nice and polite when we first met, and it's not often that job comes with free food. Pizza arrives pretty quickly, and I even tipped the delivery guy a few dollars just to say thank you for being so fast. He's literally counting out the change in dollar bills when his head snaps to the side, like he's looking into the bushes at the side of the house. I asked him if everything's okay, peering out from the door to see what he's looking at. But there's nothing, just dark bushes. He said something along the lines of, say, "Guess I'm just tired. Mine's playing tricks on me." He laughs awkwardly, then walks back to his car while thanking me again for the tip. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, was probably just a cat or something, right? So again, back inside they eat, have a full-on carb overload, and ended up just lying there on the couch watching TLC. There were these big bay windows in the family's TV room, and I had drawn the curtains earlier to block out the glare on the TV only, and drawn them all the way. And there was a slight crack in the curtains that allowed me to see into the dark front yard. At one point, my eyes were drawn to this little crack, and I could swear I saw a dark shape where street lights were previously visible. I sit up, focusing my eyes on the shape and wondering if it were my mind playing tricks on me this time. When it moved, wasn't going nuts. I had been looking at someone or something who was in turn looking at me through the big old windows. That's about when I started to freak out. I had been super chilled all evening, but now I was getting that distinctly paranoid feeling like someone was watching me. Someone who didn't exactly have the best of intentions. I ran around the house, making sure all the doors and windows are locked as a precaution, all before keeping their cordless phone as close as possible so that if it came to it, I could call the cops. I was sure I had seen someone, but the chances of them just vacating the area at the sight of flashing lights then returning later could be a huge possibility, and a terrifying one at that. So I decided to shoot my shot only when it would be absolutely necessary. Appearing to waste police time would not be doing me any favors. I suppose I'm just trying to explain why I didn't call the cops right away. I've had friends of mine that said that. They have just called 911 right then and there, but I wasn't 100% sure of anything right then. I'd seen a shape. Michael Myers pointing a knife at me. Life isn't black and white most of the time, I was thinking anyway. I've secured all the windows and doors, shoved the cordless phone into my hoodie's front pouch, and have even positioned the Little League bat near the couch so that I was sort of armed. So by that point, I started to feel relatively safe again. If there was some creeper lurking outside looking to prey on a teenage babysitter, they would get one heck of a rude awakening when I waved my bat at them and screamed that the cops are on the way. So I lie back on the couch, but naturally find myself unable to relax. I open the curtains back up so I can see if anyone is hanging around in the front yard, keeping my eyes on the windows every so often in between watching whatever social train wreck is on TLC. Nothing happens for a while, and I start to think it was all just in my head or something. Right about the time I get up to wander in the kitchen to grab a drink of water. As I'm in there, I get that intense feeling that I'm being watched. I turn to see that same dark shape in the kitchen window. Only this time, I rush into action. I hammer 911 in the phone, telling the dispatcher I need the cops to my address ASAP, that there's a home invasion in progress. I honestly don't know if it was the adrenaline or I was just sick of pervs thinking they can get away with stuff like that, but I just sort of charged after, screaming out that the cops were on their way. I ran into the TV room, grabbing the Little League bat, and just ran for the back door, which led out of the kitchen and into the backyard. What happened next is frankly astounding. As I ran it, the guy, baseball bat in hand, ready to bash his brains out right there in the yard, I recognized him instantly. It was a face I'd seen before, not long ago at all. It was the kid's dad. So long story short, the dad of the kid I had been babysitting had for whatever reason decided that you need to see what kind of babysitter I was to apparently he drove his wife to whatever party they were headed to, turned back saying he'd forgotten something, then decided to watch me over the course of about an hour or two to see if I was worth the cash that they were spending. Obviously, since no crime was actually committed, there was no one to charge. The dad offered me a sincere apology. He even offered me double the cash just to finish the night out, but I refused. No amount of money could have persuaded me to stay, and needless to say, I was very selective with who I babysat after that.